So AI assessed this statement here and said, those are Russian talking points, which what are you going to do? Other than maybe don't repeat Russian talking points as fact, but I guess that's neither here nor there. Today, we're looking at this post from David Sacks. David is a tech founder and investor and currently the AI and crypto czar at the White House. And I thought, smart guy, very successful, clearly. So who am I, just a random dude in Tennessee, to push back on what he has to say here? So maybe the best way to do it is to use technology, or for David, AI, right? The stuff he's overseen. So I thought, let's take this exact statement and plug it into a couple different platforms here. For the life of me, I can't remember which one of these are woke or deep state owned or compromised or whatever it might be. So I did 3, and we'll compare and contrast as we move along here. Bottom line up front, they hated it. They were like, what is this even saying? We've got Grok. That's the one over on the AI platform over on X, or formerly Twitter, ChatGPT, and then we also used Google's Gemini. And I'll pull up the screen to kind of walk through exactly what each one of these LLMs had to say about this quote. But starting with Grok, they said the statement contains elements of truth, but is marred by oversimplifications, selective use of data, and speculative conclusions. The statement aligns with a narrative often echoed in pro-Russian discourse on platforms like X that portray Crimea as irrevocably Russian and Ukraine's resistance as futile. That's pretty interesting because, I'll show you this here in a second. I didn't say this was like a post on X or a link or anything like that. I just copied the text over. And Grok over there on X is like, yeah, we've seen this before. We know exactly what's going on in this post. ChatGPT then said, quote, "This statement presents an oversimplified and politically charged argument that blends some accurate observations with misleading implications and unsupported conclusions." It's not super positive for Mr. Sacks. And then Google's Gemini says the statement presents a biased and simplified view of the Crimean situation and should be treated with extreme caution. Now, I thought it would be worthwhile running through each one of these. I've got ChatGPT here and Gemini and then Grok, and we'll just show word for word what they had to say. I imagine AI is probably smarter than, again, this random dude sitting in his house in Tennessee, but they kind of broke it down into 4 different sections here because right here at the top, you can see how I wrote this out. Assess this statement in terms of historical accuracy, provide evidence to support claims that are made in favor or against what is stated. And then just the text of the David Sacks post here. So again, I love that Grok saw this and was like, we know, guys. We're well aware. But starting with ChatGPT, and we're going to walk through each one of these based off the claims. I'm going to focus on the conclusion and kind of the analysis. The first claim here made by Sacks is that Crimea has been part of Russia for the last decade. And we're using AI here because I want to remove all emotions, right? There's not a personal opinion coming in here. This is the computer brains telling us what's what. So in terms of this one, they say this part is factually accurate in describing control, but it omits the legal and international rejection of Russia's annexation. Kind of short and to the point there. Moving over to Gemini, they say technically accurate, but misleading. Russia annexed Crimea in 2014, so it has been under de facto Russian control for roughly a decade. However, this annexation is not recognized by most of the international community, including the United Nations, the European Union, and the United States. They consider it a violation of international law and Ukrainian sovereignty. Again, not a great look for Mr. Sacks, but let's head over to Grok, which I think Grok's not woke, right? It's on X, so this should be, I don't know if it's necessarily better or worse, but hey, they say partially accurate but contextually misleading. While Crimea has been under Russian control for roughly a decade, describing it as part of Russia ignores the lack of international recognition and the coercive circumstances of the annexation. The claim is factually true in terms of de facto control, but misleading, without acknowledging the disputed legal status and historical context of Crimea's longer association with Ukraine and its earlier history as a multi-ethnic region under various powers, including the Crimean Tatars and the Ottoman Empire. All right, not a great start here for Mr. Sacks with his claims of fact in that post, but let's go ahead and move on to number 2 here. We've got the vast majority of its population, talking about Crimea, are ethnic Russians who, as Western polling shows, want to be a part of Russia. Grok says partially accurate, but oversimplified and reliant on questionable data. You never really like to base anything on questionable data. I feel like that's risky at baseline. But the analysis here is they say, while ethnic Russians form a majority in Crimea, the claim that the vast majority want to be a part of Russia oversimplifies a complex reality. The 2014 referendum and some Western polls are unreliable due to methodological flaws, butchered that, And coercive context. Demographic changes since 2014, driven by migration and displacement, may have tilted the population towards ethnic Russians, but this is partly a result of Russian policies, not organic sentiment. The claim also marginalizes non-Russian groups, particularly Crimean Tatars, and ignores evidence of diverse identities in Crimea before annexation. Seems like some important pieces that could have been added there, but let's see what Gemini has to say. Partially accurate. Hey, got to start out with a compliment, right? Let's not shoot everything down. This is partially accurate, but heavily contested. It's true that Crimea has a significant ethnic Russian population. However, the claim that the vast majority want to be a part of Russia as supported by Western polling is highly dubious. You know, what's the thing where you, like the compliment sandwich where you say like, you're doing a really good job. I wish you would get your work done faster. I'm so happy that you're a part of the team. I thought they were going to do that here, but they went with the compliment, partially accurate, and then heavily contested, highly dubious. They didn't leave anything up for question there. ChatGPT, last chance here for claim number 2. Partially accurate, but controversial and context dependent. They say the claim is directionally accurate. I like that. That's a good, I'm going to start using that. This is directionally accurate. In asserting majority support for Russia among ethnic Russians and based on early post-annexation polls, but ignores the coercive environment and views of minorities, especially Crimean Tatars. It overstates the legitimacy of the polling. I feel like that's a theme we're getting at this point, is understating certain things and overstating others, which can't imagine that's actually a tactic anybody would use to try to drive a point home in any situation. But hey, we've got 2 more here, so let's see what claim 3 looks like. Ukraine has no military way to retake Crimea. The disastrous summer counteroffensive of 2023 made that abundantly clear. ChatGPT, debatable, but grounded in current military realities. They say this is a reasonable, if pessimistic, assessment of Ukraine's current military capability regarding Crimea. However, it ignores the potential for long-term attritional strategies and evolving battlefield dynamics. All right, you know what? I feel like they're kind of walking the line there. Not really taking a hard stance one way or the other. That's, if anything, we got to give that one to Sachs, right? Give him something here. Let's see what Gemini has to say. This is a complex and highly debated point. Ukraine's military capabilities to retake Crimea are indeed limited, especially in the short term. The 2023 counteroffensive did not achieve its desired goals, and Crimea's geography, heavily fortified Russian positions, and the presence of the Russian Black Sea Fleet make it a very difficult target. I would say that's all accurate, and it kind of lines up with what Sachs is saying. Let's see what Grok has to say. Partially accurate, but speculative and overstated. They're coming with the hammer. All right. They say the 2023 counteroffensive's limited success highlights the challenges of retaking Crimea, given Russia's fortifications and Ukraine's resource constraints. However, the claim overstates the impossibility by dismissing Ukraine's non-conventional successes, like drone strikes and the potential for future operations with Western support. The counteroffensive's outcome reflects specific tactical and logistical issues, not a definitive barrier to retaking Crimea. The statement also ignores Ukraine's strategic goal of making Crimea untenable for Russia through sustained pressure, which showed progress in 2023. So kind of what they're saying there is the Ukrainian advances in the southern portion of the country do not automatically translate to what a possible offensive against Crimea would look like. It raises some of the concerns, but you can't do the one for one and say if A, then B. It doesn't really line up there, especially if capabilities and infrastructure has changed over the course of the war. Now, the last one here, claim 4. If Zelensky won't concede this, he won't concede anything. So a deal with him is impossible. The Secretary of State is right to walk away. And that's what we're hearing recently is Secretary Rubio saying enough's enough. You know, we gave it everything we could, and echoed by Vice President Vance. We got other things to move in on or to focus on. Grok says this is speculative and lacks historical grounding. They say the claim is speculative and unsupported by evidence of the Secretary of State abandoning talks. Zelensky's firm public stance on Crimea aligns with Ukraine's legal and political constraints, but past proposals show openness to diplomatic compromises. The statement's assertions that no deal is possible exaggerates Zelensky's position and ignores the complexity of negotiations, where Crimea is one of many issues. Without specific evidence of a U.S. walkout, this part of the statement appears to be an opinion rather than a historical fact. I'd say I'd probably read that as an opinion. I think that's a good way to look at that. Over on Grok, they say this is a highly subjective and politically charged assertion. It assumes that Crimea is the primary obstacle to a negotiated settlement and that Zelensky's stance is inflexible. And then we'll wrap up, see if Sachs can end on a positive note here. Okay. They say this is opinion, not fact, and oversimplifies both Ukraine's position and negotiation dynamics. They say this is a political assertion, not a factual statement. It assumes zero negotiation flexibility and presents one man, Zelensky, as the entire obstacle, ignoring broader legal, political, and international considerations. So, overall, if we're going off the computers, are they smart enough to pick this apart? I don't know. Maybe that's up for debate, but it seems like, from what I can tell, Grok, Gemini, and ChatGPT are like, hey, man, those are Russian talking points. Those don't actually line up with reality. So, maybe we'll have a faster, simpler way to kind of fact check some of these opinions being presented as facts in the future, but thought it was at least worth diving into this one. I'll link the original thread in the description below and see what I can do to link some of the prompts and such that I used for each one of these platforms if you want to check it out for yourself. I feel like it'll probably give you a similar answer, but I don't exactly know how that works. Is it kind of tailored to each individual? Nonetheless, thought it was an exercise worth tinkering around with. But that's all I got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.